So this will be a very different talk to what we had till now. I wanted to focus on satellite. What? Oh yeah. Yeah. So my focus here is on things that are often thought of like just take things from the shelf, right? So we don't really think about very deeply about the features that we use in general. And this is an effort to try to dive a little bit deeper into the actual data that we're using in our models and how this could affect the performance of different systems and what we could potentially do about it. So the motivation I have is that, as you know better than I do, several state-of-the-art generative models, they are heavily relied on time frequency representations. And we often treat them as images, even if we use the complex representations. And the hypothesis is that if we somehow improve these features, we could also improve performance. And this could be useful in challenging situations in which we could have perhaps less data. Of course, if you have a huge amount of data, this could potentially be not very effective. But also in challenging situations in which you want a very good definition and you want to perhaps separate different sources or be very attentive to the details of what's going on in timbre, etc. We know that many state-of-the-art systems, they still don't sound very good. So the attention to quality is something that is still a struggle sometimes. Right? So this is the most elaborate part of the Symposium. As you can see, you have data, the learning model, and output. So you can do some tricky things. If you don't have enough data, you can try to use your data and modify it somehow. So use data augmentation. Perhaps you want to add some noise, pitch shift, whatever you need to increase the amount of data you have to feed your deep learning model. And we heavily rely on data transformation as well. And why do we do this? Why don't we just use the audio signal from scratch? Because from the beginning, we want to induce some bias to our system, right? We simply rely on models that are around for decades. So we want to represent our signals in terms of a sum of different very short sinusoids. And this is really nice. This works a lot. We know this is working very well. But also when we do this, we impose some limitations to our model. And sometimes our signals are not very well represented by this pre-model that we are attaching to our model. So let's get back to the basics here. Spectrogram. We take some little pieces of the signal, we apply a smoothing window, and we take the Fourier transform. So we have the frequency content of that piece, and for all pieces, we can then have this 2D representation of our one-dimensional signal. For a stereo, then we have two, but it's the same. And what happens is that now we have to cope with the problem of the window. Right. So if I have, say, 1,024 samples, time domain, I will have 1,024 samples in frequency domain. The window will affect how this information is preserved or how it's represented here. And basically, we have, with short windows, we have kind of fuzzy, problematic frequency resolution, but our time resolution will be better. And the other way around, if I increase my window, all my attacks, everything that happens in the time domain will be smeared, but then I will have better representation of what best fits that model, which is sinusoid, long sinusoids, right? And with music content, we often have everything. We have long sinusoids, we have very short sinusoids, we have things that are like 2 milliseconds and then are gone. And how can we represent everything at once with one model? It's complicated, right? What we do is we just assume there is an optimal window for everything, and we work with that, and that's okay. And then we feed our model, and we try to increase the complexity of our model and to have a better way of coping with very high dimensionality. But this is happening from the beginning, and we're not dealing with this, right? So basically, we are stuck to this uncertainty principle, which is the time frequency resolution is upper bounded. If you want to properly represent with a proper mathematical transform with those mathematical principles that we sometimes want, sometimes we don't. So we have to deal with this. But what if we break some mathematical properties so that we can get away with this? This is what we will get to further. But this is the basic problem I want to show, and I want to show some tricks that we could perhaps avoid this kind of thing and get better results. So let's take a look at a little bit of the information that we have here. This is just one note on the guitar, this blue one. And what happens is that right at the attack, we know that there's a surge in energy, and then we can see all the harmonics, and there's some weird stuff here. So let's say we want to generate a signal like this. We want our model to learn how these features, if it's working on time frequency features, we want it to learn how this kind of signal behaves, right? So not only the intensity of these harmonics, but also I want a very clear representation of the attack of this instrument. And there's research showing that a huge part of what is important to us in terms of recognizing an instrument comes from the attack. This is crazy. If you take like two very different instruments and you just cut off the attack and you use a smoothing window just to hear the tail of the instrument, it's much harder to identify which instruments that. So we not only want to care about the fine details of which frequencies are being represented with what intensity, but also the attack, and also these weird things here. You see these lines? These are not harmonic. This is part of the body of the instrument. If I play a different note, this would be fixed. So many times there are things that don't fit our simplistic way of understanding harmonic signals or musical signals, but it's much more complex. And this is not harmonic, is it? Okay, so a little bit more complicated representation. Now bend the frequency resolution, and we have the CQT, which is the constant Q transform. You're all familiar with this, probably, but just for you to have an understanding in this context here. If you see the analysis window, it changes in frequency. Because if I want a frequency, a fixed representation in this logarithmic scale, I need a different number of samples per frequency, right? And so this would be like the length of the analysis window for each of these frequencies, roughly in octaves. So as you see, in the lower octaves, we have extremely long windows. As we go up, the window shortens until it's very, very short. And of course, we need, for those windows, we need very short hop sizes. Otherwise, I would lose data, right? So I can have, this is the signal. It's Carnival, and you're in Germany. Yeah? So I think this signal is very interesting because we have very low frequency stuff, and you can hear it's not, it has a very clear attack, right? But you can see this here. So if you use this to feed a model, you are not properly feeding the information that we hear. The information is preserved. I can invert this and get to the same signal, but I am not inducing a proper bias to represent the signal I want to represent, and therefore I'm probably not helping the system work properly with this representation. And so what, as you can see, very long steps. We need very short steps there. If you use the same short steps for all the frequencies, you have a huge redundancy, right? So what you can do is basically you can, for each time frequency line, so for each frequency you can have its own step size. So you would have a representation which is not coherently distributed to the space. So we would have different time frames for each one, which is kind of hard to work with. So one solution which is a little bit better is to use like the shortest step you need for that octave. So you have a little bit of redundancy, and then once you get to the next octave from upside down, you adopt the next hop size for that octave, and then you increasingly have longer steps until you get to the last octave here down here, and then you adopt the hop for this one. So a little bit of redundancy, but then you have proper matrices. This is what Eloy did in his work. I'm going to show in the next slide. So one very interesting thing about this representation, and this is why it has been used a lot, is that the pitch, the distance between the different harmonics now is fixed in this representation, so it's pitch invariant. And this is very interesting, mainly because if you want to use convolutional kernels, this is a very nice property to have, right? You have one shorter kernel which would coherently see all the activations of nodes independently from which pitch they're happening. So as you can see, the low pitch drum and the cuica, everything that is harmonic will have this proper shape being represented in all the 2D representation. And as we saw with the STFT, if we change the resolution, we can increase or decrease the time of frequency resolution conversely, right? So 8 beams per octave would be a much better representation for these lower frequencies you can see, but also the partials would be much thicker. So if you increase the resolution, you have much finer lines. So depending on the material you want to represent, it can vary a little bit what you use. Like Eloy used for piano, so the notes are very stable. You don't have pitch shifts, but also the attacks you lose a little bit. Okay, so how can we use this? Should I just adopt 16, 32? I don't know. You can try. So many times you just try out and what is the best. So we use the best. So this is the prior work from Eloy. So old, it's 2024. Yeah, so basically he used that redundancy that I talked about to feed different levels of the unit with different octaves, so that it would start with the last octave above, So it would have maximum time resolution, and as you go down level by level, you also start feeding the next octaves, starting from the top, right? So every time you get another octave, the hop size would be increased very conveniently in this rate, right? So you just downsample time-wise the next octave, the octave you have above, and then you have a coherent matrix, and you can do this iteratively until the last octave. The problem, you get to the last octave, which is I always change the last and first, but the lowest octave will have just a few beats in time domain, but that worked. And the idea was, let's try to increase the resolution of the lower parts of our spectrum so that we can change, and instead of being stuck to one representation, we could use the best of each. So how can we do this? Well, it's a simple trick. We actually, instead of downsampling in time, when I want to change from one CQT to another, I can downsample in frequency, and I still have the same coherent matrices that I can stack to one another to have at the end a complete representation, and always having a coherent resolution depending where the unit is evaluated by the signal. So in this case, we adopted 32, 16, and 8 for these octaves. So we started the top 2 octaves with 32 beats per octave, then we switch 16 beats per octave, and when we get to the last 3 down here, we use 8 beats per octave. And the assumption is that this would be a better representation, and therefore a better induce a better bias to our systems. And so how can we so this is the idea, but how can we try it out and assess the performance of this? This is just a backbone system you could use for anything, and it's also independent from the work frame you have, diffusion wise. So we tried to test the generalization capabilities of this unit with different types of signals. So the output would be roughly this. It would take this part and the rest would be 0, and you invert, and then the other part would be 0, top and bottom, and then just the top, the rest would be 0. You invert all 3 of them, and you sum them together, it should get to a coherent signal in time domain. So the experiments we tried not to use for a specific task, but rather to just unconditionally generate signals and see how they perform and compare with other types of models as well. So we compared with UNet 1D, also STFT domain, CQT domain, which is the original one, ours, and also the stable audio open latent space domain. And then we tried, because we wanted a more general model to work with audio material in general, instead of being focused on piano or whatever it might be. So we tried, in this study, we tried with vocals and general music, so the pop, the FMA pop subset and the open singer. So there's always the problem. We use the FAD, and that's what we have, right? Or conditional generation, and there's a problem of scale. Javier loves it. Yeah, so let's listen to some examples.
There are problem of scale. I mean, I'm just.
You're right. I don't disagree.
We have to. I think it's a good habit to have upper and lower bounds for these metrics. Know that are so scale dependent.
Yeah.
They change so much. So if you put some FAD on real data and some corrupted data to have the upper and lower bounds, it's always a good.
So we compare all these and we tracked numbers of iterations to see their performance, to see how they converge and where they get to. And ours is the brown one. It seems to converge pretty fast. And also after converging, you see that it gets to kind of better. That is comparable with the other one, but it also converges faster. So this is what we expected. If you have a better inducting bias, it might get to the same place but faster, or to a better place. Who knows? So let's listen to some chaotic examples. I'm so sorry, it's chaotic, but it's nice.
Sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar, yeah. Doesn't sound like music to me.
This is what unconditional generation sounds like.
Yes, and this is ours. It's chaos, but it's music. I love it.
Like a radio.
Yeah, you're changing stage. It's crazy. And you can hear the artifacts. Yeah. So to my ears, I feel like this has a lot of artifacts. This has a lot of artifacts, and it's not very different. The distribution is not that different, right? But I feel like this has a little bit more musical, more coherent material. In general, I just have one example here, but we passed through a lot of chaos. Yeah, and you can see this behavior from scratch as well. This from the first iterations. This behavior it is very coherent. And the open singer is a data set for people singing in Chinese. So. Sounds Chinese to me.
So far, so good.
Yeah. Do you notice there are more artifacts? These, to me, these are very similar, but these two have a lot of artifacts. And the LDM, it was the autoencoder was pre-trained, right? You didn't train from scratch.
We don't train that one.
Huh?
We didn't train the autoencoder. We used the pre-trained one.
Yeah, exactly. It was pre-trained already. So. Yeah. So our hypothesis: the better overall time frequency resolution has provided a better induction bias for the input material. Can we prove this? No. Can we prove it's better? No. We just think it is. It's a work in progress. Right? But it definitely converges faster. It's almost the same. So there seems to be an advantage to use, and this is a very simple trick. We just used CQTs. We didn't combine CQTs. We didn't do any fancy stuff. We just, instead of getting stuck to the same CQT and reducing the time resolution in the UNet, we switched from one CQT to another and used theoretically the same time frequency resolution in general, but we switched from frequency resolution to time resolution to have more coherent signals. Okay, so getting back to the transformation. What if we, as I said, we lose some properties, but we work with some different transformations which I call high resolution time frequency representation. I worked with this a lot. And some ideas that I got into, I will try to explain in a very, very simple manner. I will not go through the mathematical background, but just so that you understand the ideas. So let's say we have two representations. This would be using a short window. So what happens? Let's say this would be the ideal time frequency localization of a sinusoid if you simply start from this time. So we would expect to see the energy concentrated around this time frequency part. And what we have with short windows is that we have a very good time representation, so I know exactly where it starts, but the energy is spread in frequency. And conversely, with a longer window, let's say I have a window that is this long, so it would start detecting this sinusoid since it was centered here, but then also I have a very nice representation, concentration in frequency, right? And what I want is this. This is ideal, and doesn't exist, and I hate this, but I need this because I want to know where all my partials, everything I care about in the audio signals is concentrated to. Then I can have better source operation. I can have a better timbre representation or whatever I want. If I can represent properly, then I can work better with whatever model I can feed this into. And there are three main ways of doing this. One is combining, doing a beam-wise combination. And for this, I need coherent 2D representations. And what happens is that if I simply use naively the STFT, say for instance, I would have different representations. They would be one longer and the other taller, right? So I need them to have alignment in time frequency. So I need the same amount of bins, not the resolution, amount of bins in frequency and time. I can do interpolation or of the same hop size, whatever I need. And then if they are coherent, then I can have bin-wise combinations. So I just analyze each bin to see what I can do for my combined representation. Or I can do a representation based on local information of each bin. So I analyze what is around that bin to see what I can do. And also I can use some image analysis to guide this combination. But the basic principle is that, let's say for the SWGM, which is bin-wise combination, I can use the value of each bin to then weight their to calculate their weight in the final representation, and I can have both these time frequency bins represented there with different weights. Yep. So basically, this region would have a much higher weight to this representation, and these regions would have a higher weight compared to these. So we would have this. Right. So I think the principle is clear. And if I want to use these combinations based on local information, I can have like something like the FLS, the fast local sparsity. It's an algorithm which basically computes a suitability function for each time frequency bin, and then this will guide the weighting process to get to the same place. Yeah. So just an example of what you can do. So this is a spectrogram of a similar signal. So I have all sorts of things that I want to preserve here. So this is, can we turn these off?
They were off yesterday.
Yeah, I don't know if there is one.
The advanced.
Final control. I'm a control freak, I know. Oh yes. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So you can see this. This is a black blob here. So this is that low pitched drum here.
And these harmonic lines you can see, and this is a very fast frequency variation. Like, this is often happening in voice recordings. We want to track this. We are very sensitive to pitch variations. We pay a lot of attention to vocals, right? And when we hear an AI-generated music with a strange vocal, we're this is AI. So if we can better represent this, perhaps this should help the generation as well. And we can see this is a spectrogram with 1024 samples, so it's kind of short, on the short side of analysis windows when it comes to length. And you can see these sharp attacks here. Clearly there's an attack here, here. These are percussive elements. So let's say we use instead double size. Now we start seeing there are more partials here. We didn't see this before. And the attacks are getting smoother and smoother when you get to 4 times. But see how many partials we have here. We had lost this if we used a short window. But now we lost the attacks. What if we combine the 3 of them? Ta-da. We also preserve this. This is beautiful, isn't it? We preserve the attacks, we preserve this, we preserve the partials, we preserve this attack. But what did we lose? We were working here, we only have magnitude. Now this is not invertible anymore, even if you get the best phase possible, because this is an improper representation. So if you want to use the magnitude for whatever reason, for MIR, it's great. If you want to generate things, then you have to kind of use this. Or perhaps use this and then feed a diffusion model to see what is the best signal I can generate from this. But if you have this from scratch and you have a system capable of decoding this, or encoding this as well, then this could be very useful for things where you need very fine details. Perhaps you can much better separate this from the rest, or separate whatever element you want, and you have less leaking in between the channels, whatever. So as a proof of concept, we got this, and this is 22 is an old brother, but this is a system full convolutional, and it's multi-objective for node transcription. And since it is just using some convolutional kernels, it's kind of simpler. We can use this as a proof of concept. Can we get better performance if we use a combination of features and just keep everything the same to compare? Well, so originally it uses 36 beats per octave, so it's a CQT, and it does some interesting tricks here. The harmonic stacking is an interesting thing. I don't see it being explored for generation very often, but I think it should be useful. Do you know if someone uses this? I've never seen no one using it other than for MIR. So harmonic stacking is basically, do you remember when I said that there's a pitch invariance property in the CQT? So basically, if you have, let's say, these 4 piano notes here, this is all piano. These 4 notes, you can see that these are the first harmonics, so F0, second harmonics, third harmonics. They are equidistant in terms of the distance from H1 to H2 from this node is exactly the same from this node. Right. So what you can do is to further induce a bias by not only feeding the CQT, but a stack of CQTs, just shifting in frequency so that you bias, from the beginning, you align the different harmonics. So you could have like this first layer like this, you just take this part, and the next layer, it is shifted, so the second harmonics would align with the first one, and then the next layer, the third harmonics with the line, and you can have, then you would have like these, could have more concentrated convolutional kernels, which would see at once all the harmonics, or 8 harmonics, whatever you want. So this is the harmonic securities, the harmonic stacking. So they use harmonic stacking and just convolutional to track pitch, note, and offset. And so what could we do to keep all the pieces together exactly the same and just test a different feature? Well, it's 36 bins per octave. The best thing I can do is to combine with things that have less than 36 bins per octave. So if you combine 36, 24, and 12, you would have a feature that better tracks the time resolution compared to the original one, right? So what we have is this. We tried different CQTs. The original one is this, and actually if they use 24, they would have a little bit better results. But all the combinations are better. Just for note transcription. Look at this. If you use the FLS, it's hugely different. It's much better. This is just for guitar. We could try to track with other instruments as well. It's just a toy example, but just to show that if it's useful for these simple convolutional kernels for note transcription, it's probably because you are better tracking all the information you need, and probably it's better for generation as well. So this is where we got into. I didn't try this yet. And the expectation is that we could have a better synthesis, source separation, temper transformation, denoising, whatever you need, if you have a final representation of these sonic characteristics. The challenge is that we lose phase, and we don't have, as I said, we don't have any more proper representation in which you could just retrieve the best phase and you could have exactly the same signal, simply because you kind of distorted the signal to see everything better. We had a student who just finished his, not just, some months ago, his bachelor thesis in this, and he tried an alternative Griffin limb variation in multi-resolution to see what could be the best phase retrieval for those different resolutions, and then the combination of phases to retrieve the best signal. It's interesting. We didn't publish it yet. But this is a struggle. We have to deal with phases somehow to generate. So we could perhaps train a model to generate complex data from the combined magnitude and see how it behaves. And also we have to deal with higher dimensionality if we want to increase the frequency resolution, for instance, or time resolution. We can't get better results without increasing our dimensionality. So this would lead to potentially problems with memory requirements. Yep. So just to conclude, the diffusion models, they are architecture agnostic, but the induction bias matter, and it really can have an impact on what you get from the data you have. So better input features lead to better performance, as we could see with the multi-resolution CQT diff. And potentially you could use these high resolution time frequency representations, or the combination of representations, to have final representation both in time and frequency domains. We have only magnitude, and potentially we will slow down training by having a high dimensionality, and also by computing from the beginning these instead of computing one representation to feed the network, we have to compute more than one and combine them. So depending on how fast you need this to be done, this has to be dealt with. So this is some bibliography I talked about, and thank you very much.
Do you think these performance improvements, because of the choice of the representation, will hold if perhaps you use data that maybe doesn't exhibit such transposition invariances like electronic sounds or just sounds in general, not music or music, but as I said, that maybe doesn't conform to the Western musical standards, or electronic music where you don't have, it's a bit more.
Yes, I would just like the STFT can be used to track things that are harmonic and it is a representation that is not pitch invariant, right? So if you use, for instance, a CQT, which provide this bias, then you would have perhaps in some part of the material which doesn't fit this kind of behavior, but just like in the other side, the harmonic material doesn't fit that behavior there, and it kind of works as well, right? So
I wonder if maybe just let the models find the representation that suits the data. No?
And one thing that is important is that the overall energy of these combined representations is preserved. So you're not kind of reducing noise to only see sinusoids. You know what I mean? Noise becomes noise, sinusoid becomes sinusoids, but their representation among the input that you provide to the representation, it tracks which of these inputs better represents that part of the time frequency region. So for each region you have it's like a puzzle that is being picked up by different representation, but never losing anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not making up anything. It's just applying different weights for these input features, and whenever they are kind of similar or doesn't matter, the weights will be similar and they would just reconstruct everything at the end.
So you say no, it wouldn't harm.
Wouldn't harm.
It should still.
Yes. Yep. What else? And I assume that if you use this kind of, I don't assume because I'm not doing this, but I would assume that if you use this kind of better representations for VAEs, for instance, you could have perhaps more meaningful or better quality latent space that opens a whole new world of possibilities of working on that domain as well. Yeah. So there's a lot to experiment with. Yes.
For the conversion back to waveform, we tried to use a deep model instead of, because of the Griffin mean adaptation. I don't know how you mentioned it, but I don't know how that would work. But you could also, there are models that do Mel spectrograms back to waveforms. You could try to use combined representation. Sorry, Mel spectrograms back to waveform. You try to do combined representations back to waveform.
I didn't try yet. But also, one nice thing is that you can use, for instance, we know that the magnitude representation is kind of broken in this way for inversion. But let's say you naively take one of the phases, let's say the mid representation, take its phase and try to reconstruct with that. It sounds really good, actually, from scratch. So one thing you can do is just to adopt one of these phases and kind of iterate with Griffin or whatever to try to improve a little bit. And it's already very convincing. So, and this was a surprise for us because we thought that now it would sound weird and it doesn't really. So I think there's a lot of potential to not even retrieve the phase, but if you use one of these originals, and let's say you want to use for source separation, if you want to apply some masking, you could just use that magnitude mask with the original phase and should get something.